We all remember the controversy surrounding this election a few years ago, or this one just a couple days ago, but before these two elections, the 2000 election was the one that people would beat each other up for. In our timeline, Al Gore lost the election due to George Bush gaining a majority of just 300 votes out of 6 million cast in Florida, which gave Bush the White House. But let's imagine a scenario where Al Gore won the election and dealt with the events that would unfold in the early 2000s. This is not to say that this exact scenario would happen if Al Gore was in the White House, but just a prediction. For this scenario to take place, he would have to win the majority of votes in Florida alone, which I could see happening if he were to simply spend a little bit more money on advertisements in the state. With Florida under his belt, he will have secured the White House with the total of 291 electoral votes and will be sworn in as the 43rd president of the United States. The first few months of a Gore presidency would most likely see some of his key policy proposals with climate change being the centerpiece of these new acts of legislation, along with some minor tax raises on the wealthy. Just like in our timeline, evidence of a possible terrorist attack against the United States will be uncovered around late August. It's unknown whether Gore would take these threats seriously or would brush them off as speculation and continue his focus on climate legislation. Even if Gore had increased defense and security at transfer links, he would not have been able to prevent the September 11 terrorist attacks, which would be a turning point in his presidency. Immediately following the attacks, Gore would address the nation on television, promising that the United States will respond to this act of aggression and bring the aggressors to their knees. Despite there being no way to prevent the attack from happening, many Republicans would call for Al Gore to step down or be impeached as he failed to uphold his oath of protecting the United States from harm. Since Republicans would control the House, a vote might be held to impeach Gore, but it is very unlikely to pass, and even if it did, the Senate would shoot it down as Republicans do not have a supermajority there. Later in mid-September, Congress with Gore's support passed major pieces of legislation that intensify security all across the United States, and soon after these new laws are passed, an invasion of Afghanistan would commence in order to oust the extremist Taliban-controlled government. As this is going on, the United States and the United Nations begin planning other counter-terrorism measures around the world. With Gore's popularity at an all-time high and the midterm elections having come, Democrats see a minor boost in both branches of Congress, gaining a House majority and a couple seats in the Senate, giving them a true majority in the Senate. With a one-party Congress to back him up, Gore uses this to his advantage to make further progress with climate change legislation. Throughout the entirety of 2003, we can expect Al Gore to expand on climate change laws and amp up green energy production. With the Democratic majority allowing it, a carbon tax would be introduced that penalizes corporations that emit too many greenhouse gases, and schools would start implementing mandatory climate change education in elementary school science classes. With the 2004 election around the corner, it's extremely hard to nail down who the Republican nominee would be. But in this case, I'm going to assign that role to George W. Bush, since in our timeline he had plans to run again if he lost in the year 2000. By this point, he would have secured the nomination again, and his agenda would consist of promises to get tough on terror and to bring in significant tax cuts. With the stability of Iraq having slumped so low, the country descends into a civil war by this point. As the civil war goes strong in Iraq, its concerns develop in the United Nations of the possibility of WMDs in the country that could end up in the wrong hands unless an active intervention happened. The thought of an intervention becomes popular among Republican politicians who call for US-led intervention, with George W. Bush leading the charge. With the American public in support of an invasion, the Congress narrowly votes later that month to send troops into Iraq, with the unanimous support among Republicans and a small amount of support among Democrats. The next week, an invasion of Iraq commences with the intention to seize WMDs found in the nation. However, by mid-October, it becomes clear that the nation does not possess a single WMD, and Al Gore criticizes Bush for rallying Republicans to support an invasion. Due to this, Bush subsequently slumps in the polls, and in the 2004 election against Gore, he loses again, with Gore securing Florida and New Hampshire by several thousand votes each, causing no need for a recount. With the threat of WMDs gone, starting in early to mid-2005, troops begin arriving home from Iraq, along with a large percentage returning home from Afghanistan, as Gore pushes to reduce conflict abroad. And with the help of the United States, the Iraqi Civil War ends in the summer of 2005, and a provisional government is put in place with elections scheduled for that August. With his focus now directed back towards domestic issues, Gore continues to push for green energy development throughout 2005, with climate change being a very polarizing issue in the United States, just like how the coronavirus is in our timeline. Come 2006, the economy will start to slide just like in our timeline. As concerns begin to arise in the investment community, President Gore criticizes Wall Street but refuses to intervene, as his economic philosophy was to not get involved unless absolutely necessary. With the Democratic Congress not caring much about what seems to be an impending economic crash, Republicans sweep the midterms and take a noticeable majority in both the House and the Senate. With the warning signs having come and nothing being done about it, the US markets crash, leading to a late 2000s economic crisis. This causes the Democrats Democrats to lose even more support, and their chance of winning the White House in 2008 is in shambles, with the Republican nominee expected to win in a landslide against their Democratic challenger. By now, the 2008 election is underway, and Al Gore's presidency is basically over by this point. During his time in the Oval Office, he left behind a strong legacy as a leader who quickly responded to the 9/11 attacks, fought diligently against terrorism, and worked to expand the use of green energy as much as possible. While this scenario I've just played out may not be entirely accurate in what Al Gore would do as president, it is the best prediction I can make based on what he planned to do as president of the United States. Still, I would like to thank you for watching, make sure to like and subscribe.